One of my childhood homes had a balcony that was attached to both my mother's bedroom and mine via big glass doors in each of our rooms. Next to the balcony are 2 trees. One of them I often used to climb up and down from the balcony. One night, my brother and my mother weren't home. I was 13 years old, reading in bed with a very dim reading light. I heard what sounded like something moving in one of the trees outside. But this didn't worry me, as possums and bats are common in our area. Now, I had thin curtains on the glass doors that separated my room and the balcony, and the doors faced out towards the street, where street lamp light was always visible through my curtains. Shortly after hearing the tree rustling noises, I see a shadow slowly move past the doors, at which point I immediately turn off my reading light and freeze like a deer in headlights. The shadow is tall, so it wasn't a neighbor kid, and it definitely wasn't my mother, who was 5 foot tall. The person moved slowly, creeping as though they were trying not to be noticed. They wouldn't likely be able to see into my room, but I could see them thanks to the streetlights behind them. They moved past my doors out of sight. I sat there unable to move or even think about what to do other than be absolutely still. That is, until I heard another sound. The sound of someone trying to open a glass door. My mom's doors to the balcony. I didn't know if she had locked them or not, but I wasn't taking chances. I moved as quickly and as silently as I could to my bedroom door and locked it. I listened for what the person was doing now, and they were still jiggling the glass door handle, but it sounded like the doors weren't opening. I felt relief. This person couldn't get in, surely. All I had to do was wait for them to realize that, and then they would leave, right? I heard light footsteps move back along the balcony to my set of glass doors until I saw his shadow stop directly in front of them. Again, I froze. He couldn't see me. He couldn't know that I can see him. I saw a shadow of a hand reach up to my door's handle, and my heart stopped. Had I locked those doors today? I was out there earlier. What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to him grabbing the handle felt like an eternity. But thankfully, when this person tried to open the door, it did not open. It was locked. I sighed such a sigh of relief. I was worried that he had heard it. After this, he began pacing the length of the balcony. I didn't have a cell phone, and the landline was at the other end of the house, but I was too scared to take my eyes off the person. I was silently crying and praying that they would just leave. Then, I heard him stop moving, and then he said, "I could just break the glass, you know." Before I could even process this, I saw car headlights turn around the corner of my street and then stop at our property gate. My mom was home. The person on the balcony moved out of sight. When my mom came inside, I was hysterical and was barely coherent in telling her what happened. Eventually, I got the message across and she called the police. They never found or caught anyone, but a neighbor reported a truck in the street that matched the description of a truck that had been reported recently for attempted child abductions near my school, which was a block away. Some years ago, I was staying at my parents' place looking after their cat while they were away on vacation. At a little before 5 a.m. one morning, I was woken to the sound of the glass on their front screen door shattering, followed by pounding on the door. I went to the door to find out what was happening. Long story short, one of the neighbors had a grown child living with them who had a psychotic breakdown. He attempted to murder both his parents with a big butcher knife. His mom escaped and ran to my parents' house. I let her in, of course. Her arms and hands were covered in defensive wounds, and she had also been stabbed several times. She ended up surviving. Her husband did not. The kid committed suicide. The scariest part that I didn't know until later, at the time that I let the mother in, as I was closing the door, I thought I saw someone else. I opened it thinking maybe it was the father needing help too, but no one was there, so I shut the door again and went back to helping the mom. A neighbor who had been woken up by the noise and looked out the window told me that it was the son chasing his mom up my parents' front steps that I had seen. He turned away after I closed the door and went back and killed his father instead. If I had been 5 seconds later letting her in, she likely would have been killed on my parents' front doorstep. A couple seconds faster opening the door again, and he still would have been there. I had pulled over one night to discipline my 2 young children. A car pulled up beside me and told me that there had been a wreck over the next hill and traffic was stopped. They suggested that I take a side road that detours the wreck. I thanked them and they left. I decided not to take that road because I'm from the country and didn't want to get lost. As I drove by the detour road, I looked over and saw the couple had stopped and had gotten out of their car. There was nothing but woods all around. It was just getting dark, and that's all I could see. The next morning, as I drove by the same road, I saw the dead end sign just past where the couple had gotten out of their car. It still gives me the chills when I drive past it now, and it's been 15 years since it happened. My daughter was driving from Wichita Falls, Texas to Oklahoma City on I-44 to catch our plane home to Pennsylvania. It was 4:05 a.m. I remember because I was afraid that we would miss our flight, and the highway was empty. We were almost out of Lawton city limits when we saw an older model car, light blue or silver, launch off an embankment, roll 3 or 4 times. I could actually see a human fly through the air. I pulled over and called 911 and gave them the GPS coordinates of the overpass. I asked the dispatch if I should back down the highway, and she told me not to because there was an officer less than 2 minutes away. When I got home, I Googled it, and this is what I found. Exactly 10 years prior, a group of teenagers were speeding down a suburban road when they lost control, flipped over a guide rail, and rolled down the embankment. All 6 kids were killed. They were driving a 1986 Oldsmobile. The time of the accident, 4:05 a.m. I was living in Las Vegas at the time and was 19 years old. I lived in a trailer park in Northtown, a not-so-nice area of Las Vegas. The trailers were about 10 feet apart, at best. At about 11 p.m., I heard the sound of bodies flopping on the ground from the trailer next door. It sounded like someone wrestling or fighting, but no yelling or loud voices. I then heard the screen door of the trailer open, and then a car speed off. I thought nothing of it, and kept to myself. My roommate was at work, and wouldn't be home until morning. I went to bed. I woke up to a tapping on my front door. As I opened my eyes, I saw a police officer holding a shotgun leaned against my window. I woke up in a hurry and answered the door. The police officer told me that I had to vacate the premises for my own safety. Apparently, the sounds I heard were from my neighbor who stabbed and killed someone in their trailer. The road that I take to get to my house is very long and windy. It's surrounded by trees, and there are no houses on it. It's just a very long road out in the middle of nowhere. 7 years ago, a car with 4 people inside crashed into a tree on that road. It was a very big deal because everyone in the car died, and supposedly there was something wrong with the brakes, and the car just kept accelerating faster and faster, and then finally hit a tree that was located almost at the end of the road. Every day when I drive down it, I think of how scared everyone inside the car must have been as they flew down this road at 100 miles per hour and then finally lost control. I literally think about it every time I drive down it. Last weekend I was driving home from work and I had gotten off late. It was around 2 a.m. when I was driving down the road. The road is unpaved and is very rough, so unless you have the right tires, you have to drive down it slow. As I was driving down, going about 15 miles per hour, I saw some people randomly standing next to a tree. I stopped the car after I passed them and saw in my passenger side mirror that there was 3 people walking towards my car. I immediately had a very bad feeling and hit the gas. I sped the rest of the way down the road much faster than I ever had before. There were 4 people that died in the crash 7 years ago, and I only saw 3 people. I don't believe in ghosts, but there was no other car on the road. I can't think of a reasonable explanation as to why they would be out there so late at night, walking down a very long road. Every time I drive down the road at night, I'm afraid I will see them again. What would have happened if I hadn't driven away from them? Many years ago, my kids told me that I had started snoring at night. I didn't believe them and decided to record myself sleeping. The next day, when I listened to the recording, the first thing you could hear was me breathing, and then after a while, I started snoring. And then, clear as day, I heard 2 voices talking to each other over me. They said, "Can she? I don't think she can." I had the tape for years. I've shown it to many people. Nobody has recognized the voices, and I always thought they were wondering if I could hear them. Driving home from my friend's house one night, I had to pee, so I pulled off the road to go. I was doing my business against an old wire fence that's meant to keep cattle from walking into the street, when I look up and see a man standing in the field in front of me, about 50 yards away. He wasn't moving, just standing there. I seriously cannot even express how scary this was. I got back in my car and drove off. It makes absolutely no sense why someone would be out in that field on a deserted road in the pitch black night. I was house sitting for my friend one time, and her dogs were acting crazy, barking at nothing, whimpering. Eventually, I had heard a weird noise upstairs. I counted the dogs, and they were all with me. I messaged a group chat that if they didn't get updates from me in 5 minutes, they should call the cops. I went to go look upstairs. I tried to bring a dog with me, but they were having none of it. Eventually, I found the source of the noise and was relieved to see that it was just the sink. I turned off the water and texted the group chat, "Never mind, it was just the sink." And then somebody replied, "But who turned it on?" I grew up in an old farmhouse on a huge valley in a residential area. One night my parents are out of town and my aunt is watching us. I'm around 12 or 13 years old at the time, and me and my sister are playing on our trampoline, which is about 5 feet from the edge of a wooded hill. It's dark outside, and it was fall, so all the leaves had fallen to the ground. Out of nowhere we hear a scream that could only be described as a woman being murdered. But not only that, with the screams we hear the leaves rustling, like she is trying to get away. My aunt hears it from inside the house and runs out and sees us looking toward the screaming. It stops completely, and she tells us to come inside and has the phone in her hand. She calls the police, and they show up. They go down and search the area for about an hour and find nothing. My brothers and I never went near that area again. Sometimes when I'm going to sleep, I like to keep track of how weird my thoughts get right before I actually fall asleep. Usually, within a few minutes before I conk out, my thoughts are just nonsense, just random things. A year ago, I was going through a pretty bad time. My girlfriend dumped me for another guy. Work was terribly stressful, and I only found a new apartment a couple days before my lease was up and I had to move out. A day or two before I had to move out, all my stuff was moved out already, and I was sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. I was falling asleep and paying attention to how weird my thoughts were getting. Nothing too strange, just a bunch of random thoughts and phrases popping through my head. When all of a sudden, clear as a bell, I heard what sounded like a voice just a few feet away from me say, "Just cut him open. Oh, he can hear us." I snapped up, looked around, and of course there was nobody there. It was just a creepy auditory hallucination, I guess. But it felt absolutely real, and it was made worse by how strange and how empty my home felt at that moment. This happened a few years ago. My wife was working a second shift, so it was only me and my dog in the house. As I'm getting into bed, I hear something in the den. It sounded like whispering, loud enough to hear, but not loud enough to make out what was being said. As I'm walking to my bedroom door, I'm thinking someone has broken into the house, but my dog has not made a peep the whole time. So I open the door, and it's a song that is playing. The same song that I use as my wife's ringtone when she calls me. So I just think that I left my phone out in the den. So I go check where I would usually put it in the den, but it's not there. Then I realize it's on my nightstand beside my bed where I put it to charge. So I search for where the song is coming from, and it's my computer, which I had shut down earlier in the day and now was on. The media player was pulled up, and the song, my wife's ringtone, was playing. It didn't freak me out that much at first, but the more I thought about it, it did, and I slept with the bedroom door locked that night. When I was 10 years old, I had an incredibly vivid nightmare that I was being chased through a dark maze by a giant, disembodied hand. I woke up in a cold sweat, shaking all over, and I needed to use the bathroom. I mustered my courage and got out of bed and walked down the hall. When I opened the bathroom door and turned on the light, the hand was there. I screamed at the top of my lungs and then woke up again. It turns out that I had a false awakening where you dream that you woke up. Thinking I was awake and then finding my nightmare had come true was mind-numbingly terrifying. I had fallen asleep around 9 p.m. and was awoken a little later by the sound of rumblings and glasses vibrating together. As I woke and lifted my head off the pillow, I saw what I believed to be my girlfriend's hands pull the walk-in closet door shut as she shut herself inside. I mumbled, "What the hell are you doing?" Just as I finished my sentence, she walked through our bedroom door from the hallway. I remember feeling confused and asked her what the hell was going on. She told me that there was an earthquake. Still weary, I was very confused. I eventually asked my other half, "So who just went into the closet?" "Don't say that," she said. I jumped off the bed and opened the closet door. Nothing. Just a closet. Honestly, I'm by far very skeptical about supernatural happenings, but I still to this day logically can't explain what happened. I creeped myself out by asking if maybe the earthquake happened to wake me up and stop whatever was about to happen to me from happening. Whatever was standing in my room, watching me sleep, had to quickly escape, and at the last moment, I saw a glimpse of something I shouldn't. My best friend and her father dropped me off at my house after school because my parents were still working. As they were driving away, they saw a man sneak up behind me from the other side of our house while I was unlocking the door with my back turned. They slammed it in reverse, honked like crazy, and the man turned and bolted away. I was 14 and was so frightened. That's when my innocent child view vanished. I don't know what would have happened if they didn't see him. When the first paranormal movie came out, I was still living with my mom. I saw it with my then boyfriend and was terrified. Later that night that we watched it, I was in bed. I tossed and turned for about an hour, too freaked out to fall asleep. Every little noise in the house got my heart thumping. When I actually began to fade out, I heard something in the kitchen at the other end of the house, and then footsteps down the hall getting closer to me. I also heard what sounded like someone sliding their hand along the wall. 2 seconds away from screaming, my bedroom door opens and I scream bloody murder. It's my mom. She had been sleepwalking, and she screamed as she woke up, standing in the middle of my bedroom. I was 4 years old and camping with my family. We went walking in the woods, and I stopped to tie my shoe. My parents slowed, but walked a little ahead of me. All of a sudden, this woman with the same colored hair and eyes as me came up to me, got down on one knee, held her arms out to me, addressed me by my name, and said with tears in her eyes, "Don't you remember me? I'm your real mommy. You were taken away from me when you were 2. I immediately became terrified and ran to my parents. I tried to tell them about the lady, but when they looked back, she was gone. This messed me up for years. I thought the lady was telling the truth until I was about 10 years old. I was convinced that I was kidnapped from her, when in reality, she was trying to kidnap me. My mom has brown hair and blue eyes. My dad has brown hair and brown eyes, and I have blonde hair and green eyes. That lady, whoever she was, had blonde hair and green eyes. I was watching TV probably 3 years ago. The TV had a small glare on it, and I could kind of see the sunlight from the hallway reflected on it behind me. It was probably 2 or 3 in the afternoon. I was completely alone. My wife was at work. I was watching TV, and I noticed in the glare the silhouette of a tall man stepped into view. I froze solid and didn't make any movements or noise. In fact, if you were looking at me from behind, I would have appeared to remain in the exact same state. But somehow, the silhouette of the man stopped right when I noticed it, lingered for a second, appeared to raise his arm and wave, and then stepped out of view. I didn't hear a door open or close. I didn't hear a window budge or break, or anything, and I didn't find any evidence of anyone. I am a 911 dispatcher, and I work the night shift. At my agency, we work 12-hour shifts with one partner. I am no longer on the same shift with the partner I was on that night. However, the change in partner was simply a change in schedule. To give some background, my dispatch center currently only dispatches fire and EMS, not law enforcement. We are located in one of our fire stations, and the station is only staffed by the 2 dispatchers and 2 medics in the same building. There is another separate and larger building across the parking lot where our administrative staff, such as HR and payroll, works during the regular work week. Nobody is in this building past 1700 hours or on the weekends. In this building, there is a very nice updated firefighters' quarters, which includes a large kitchen, a pool table, a couple large and comfy couches, and a television. Our fire department is a volunteer department, so the firefighters' quarters are not staffed or occupied unless there is a special event or someone decides to crew the station for a night. Being on such long shifts, I sometimes cook when the phones aren't ringing, because dispatch also has a small kitchen. We often are missing a pot or pan, so we will venture over to the nice, updated firefighter quarters because they often have what we are missing. About 3 or 4 months ago, late at night, I was trying to bake banana bread and we, of course, did not have a bread pan. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I told my partner Mike that I was going to run over to the admin building to see if they had one. I grabbed my badge that allows me to buzz into our buildings after hours and walked out the door. I started walking across the parking lot, and I took in the fresh, chilly yet crisp air that met me. It's a short walk over to the admin building, and I flashed my badge up to the buzzer and heard the lock click. The night was extremely dark, and only the building's exterior lights were on, so the inside was dark. I walked in and turned to my immediate right to buzz into the firefighters' quarters. I had my iPhone playing my Spotify playlist and tucked it into my back pocket. I walked into the firefighters' quarters and flicked on the 2 kitchen lights, but left the others off. I began sorting through the cupboards and cabinets, trying to find my bread pan. I was having quite a bit of difficulty finding the pan I was looking for, and I decided to look in their large walk-in pantry. As I'm ruffling through the pantry, I hear a muffled bang from outside the firefighters' quarters in the main lobby. It wasn't extremely loud, but I heard it over my music playing on half volume. I stop and freeze. I thought for a second that maybe Mike had followed me over to come check on me since it was taking me a long time. That was quickly debunked when I realized 2 things. First, even if he was worried, he couldn't leave dispatch without anyone at a console ready to answer a 911 call. Second, I had my cell phone on me, so he would have just called or texted me, not followed me over. My second thought was that I left the doors unlocked and somebody followed me in. That was also quickly debunked because the doors aren't manually locked and unlocked. They automatically lock 10 seconds after the initial buzz-in. I quickly found myself on edge, but figured that it was probably just the loud air ducts or heating, as it was a very large building. I kept rifling through the pantry without further incident. Still no bread pan. I exited the pantry, closed the doors, and walked over to the sink to check in the dishwasher, thinking someone may have used it and not put it away. Soon after I walked to the sink, a strong, unpleasant, and very recognizable scent took over my senses. It hit me all at once, and I couldn't believe how repulsive it smelled. As an EMT, I was able to identify the scent right away from the few times I'd encountered it. It was that of a decomposing body. I started commenting to myself how wretched it smelled, and that the firefighters needed to man up and do a better job of keeping up with their kitchen. It was not a second after I made the remark about my lazy firefighters that I heard a deep, manly scoff and chuckle coming from the other side of the firefighter quarters. I was not immediately alarmed, slightly startled, but I just walked over to see who the hell happened to be in there at such a late hour without knowing that they were crewing. I walked out of the kitchen expecting to meet someone wearing a blue fire department shirt, but nobody made themselves readily known. I followed up with a curious, "Hello?" And I made an awkward chuckle as well, thinking about how stupid I looked, blindly looking for this firefighter who startled me. Nothing, and nobody. To explain the feeling that hit me harder than a freight train is impossible. My eyes began watering, but I was not about to cry. My arms were raised with goosebumps, and my heart was doing backflips in my chest. I looked left and then right to find nobody. I walked over to the light switch and flipped them all on. All of them switched on except for the one closest to the couches and TV, and I about lost all my stability. I looked over to the dark section with a couch facing away from me with a high back. My mind danced with fear as I imagined a crazed killer laying on the couch with a sinister smile spread across their face and hiding from me, but ready to jump up at any moment. I began rationalizing the situation and realized I was being way too jumpy and dramatic. I had to use my badge not once, but twice to gain access to where I currently was, so it was clear nobody was there who shouldn't be. I spoke up again, now really thinking it was a firefighter messing with me, which wouldn't be cool, but not completely out of the ordinary either. "Hey, you scared me. I'm just trying to find a bread pan. How come you didn't tell us you were crewing?" I began approaching the couches, hoping someone would answer me. Nobody responded. I stopped about halfway from the lights to the couch. I waited another second. Okay, screw off, honestly. Also, it smells like literal death in here, so you need to clean the hell up. It's nasty. At this point, I was getting real mad, as the thought that a firefighter was just messing with me made more and more sense to me. It seemed cruel and a mean thing to do. Still, nobody answered me, and I again started to second guess myself, and maybe it was my music that somehow sounded like a male laughing. I took a deep breath and went to grab my badge and close the dishwasher. It was clear I wasn't going to find my pan. I walked over to the dishwasher where it previously smelled of rotting flesh, and much to my surprise, it no longer smelled like that rotting, almost bitter smell. I slammed the dishwasher shut and turned to leave. I switched off the lights and pressed the bar to walk out the door when I heard what sounded like nails against a bumpy textured wall coming from behind me. The air felt still as I whipped back around, getting ready to lay hard into this jerk trying to scare me. I wanted to know how screwed he would be once the chief caught wind of this. After all, it was way too early for these kinds of shenanigans, and I was over it. Despite being a smaller female, I was about ready to teach this idiot a lesson or two. But again, I saw nobody once I turned around, but the sound continued, only it almost sounded like shuffling now. I backed up into the press bar again with some force this time, and nearly fell through the doorway. My feet caught up to my increasingly panicked body on a direct path for the floor, and I turned to run out the firefighters' quarters. As I turned and began quickly pacing out the admin building, I caught a glimpse of a dark standing figure at the end of the long, open lobby near the side exit door. The eerie part was how his silhouette was dimly illuminated by the green exit sign, and all I could make out in the split second I saw him was the outline of a large body. That solidified the whole experience for me, as I knew nobody should have been in that building, and I ran all the way across the parking lot, back to dispatch, and buzzed myself in. I apologized to Mike for taking so long, and word vomited this entire encounter to him. He seemed shocked and had never heard of anything like it happening. He is also a firefighter with our department, and had been for many years, yet nobody had ever said anything similar. We decided to watch the security cameras posted outside that watch over the entrance to the admin building. Nobody exited. We investigated the next morning to find nothing out of place and nothing unusual. As far as I know, there haven't been any deaths that occurred on this property, and I have not experienced anything out of the ordinary since. I tend to think rationally, as you do in my field. I have heard my fair share of horrors and nightmares unfold on the phone with callers and seen many things in the field. This experience definitely scared me, and I will never forget that bone-tingling fear of someone able to see you, but you can't see them. I was in bed, listening to an album from a well-known metal artist. It was on full blast, when suddenly the music got interrupted and a female voice started talking. She sounded like a flight attendant, and very politely and calmly stated, "Your greatest wish is to die. Your greatest wish will come true." I freaked out and ran from my room to grab an adult. They told me to stop freaking out, that it was probably just a part of another song on the CD. I listened to that entire album several times and never found anything like that on it. Even today, I still try to search for a song that has those lyrics at the end.
I was 13 when I had my first pumpkin spice latte. Dad had taken me to Starbucks on the way to school, and as soon as I walked in, I saw their poster advertising the drink. Everything about the ad screamed warmth. The mug it showcased was a gentle beige, contrasting sweetly against the light brown wood of the table on which it sat, surrounded by artistically placed autumn leaves and festive gourds. The contents of the mug were centered in the image, showing off the perfect dollop of creamy foam with caramelly hints of espresso running through it. At the top, lovingly whispered by the deft hand of a skilled, caring barista, was a sprinkling of nutmeg. Oh, it called to me. I eschewed my normal caramel macchiato and requested a grand pumpkin spice latte. I waited anxiously with Dad by my side. He sipped his black coffee and suggested we sit for a little while. We were running early for once. I sat, shaking my leg with anticipatory excitement. The cafe smelled different that day. I'd grown accustomed to the thick, imposing aroma of a dark roasted coffee and the hint of occasional sweetness as a customer's blueberry muffin was toasted. That day, though, gripping the reins of the dark roast and riding it to a new and alluring place, was something else. Something exotic. My head swam as I realized the exotic smell was, in fact, the spicy melange of ingredients within a pumpkin spice latte. The same pumpkin spice latte I'd soon taste. After what felt like an eternity, my order was ready. Alexander, the barista, waved me over. I did my best to avoid sprinting, but my rush was obvious. I reached the counter and accepted my drink. In the tiny mouth of the lid, I could see the sprinkled spices adorning the cap of warm foam. With my eyes closed, I inhaled the steam rising from the hole. The scent was an embrace from a ghost, a non-corporeal expression of love and comfort. That first sip was transcendental. At that moment, I knew what it felt like to believe in something bigger than myself. Each day before school, Dad would take me to Starbucks to get another pumpkin spice latte. Its effect on me didn't dull, nor did it taste any less special. As early autumn reds decayed into late autumn browns, I found my mood better than it had ever been in my short life. I never knew it could be so easy to be happy. At 6:51 a.m. on December 1st, 2005, Dad and I walked into Starbucks. At 6:52 a.m. on December 1st, 2005, my happiness was torn from my chest and dashed against the rocks. The pumpkin spice latte was a limited time product. Alexander told me it'd be back just in time for fall next year, then asked if I'd like to go back to my caramel macchiato. Entombed in disbelief and disappointment, I nodded. The following days were a blur of greys. My vivacity had been strangled. Dad would ask, over and over, what he could do to make his princess happy. I didn't need to tell him, though. He knew, and there was nothing he could do about it. December slouched toward Christmas, the holiday I had always loved. Not anymore. Now that I'd seen the world through a lens of happiness and warmth, nothing looked the same without it. Quite the contrary, it all looked fake, vulgar. When I closed my eyes on Christmas Eve, I prayed for Santa to bring me blindness or death. On Christmas morning, I woke up to Dad standing next to my bed. That was a little tradition he and I had. Before Mum had passed away, they'd both come up and shake me awake and carry me downstairs to see what Santa had brought me. Now that it was just the two of us, he wanted to keep the tradition going. Even in my despondence, I still appreciated it. Dad held my hand, and we headed down the steps. Tears had started to flow without my knowing. We reached the Christmas tree in the living room. Only one present stood underneath. It was small and wrapped with bright green paper. I looked at Dad with confusion. He just smiled and beckoned me to the gift. I sat cross-legged under the tree and tore away the paper. My soft weeping grew into pitiful bleating. "Why would you do this?" I whispered to Dad, my breath heaving with sobs. In my lap, beneath the shiny, torn paper, was a cheery autumnal Starbucks mug. The same one from the poster I'd seen on that transformative day. I was baffled and hurt, but Dad stood, smiling. "Come with me, Princess." I obeyed and rose to my feet, following his stride out of the living room, down the hallway and into the kitchen. Dad looked into my misty eyes and whispered, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." He opened the cellar door. A faint but familiar and exquisite aroma entered me. In my surprise, I nearly dropped my present. "Why don't you go see what Santa brought you?" Dad suggested. I ran down the 14 steps with the same enthusiasm I had when I'd ran across Starbucks to receive my first pumpkin spice latte. This time, Dad didn't tell me to slow down. I reached the bottom, turned the corner, and there, on a makeshift bar, was a new espresso machine. I gasped. Behind the bar, manning the machine, was Alexander the barista. He smiled and stared, wide-eyed, as Dad reached the bottom of the stairs and placed himself by my side. "Go ahead, Princess. Tell the nice man what you'd like." My voice quavered at first, but I finished my request with an enthusiasm and strength. "May I please have a pumpkin spice latte?" Alexander, still smiling, nodded. He began to work. The coffee was ground, and thick espresso drooled out of the machine into the bottom of the mug. With a hiss of steam, the milk was frothed. Warm milk joined the espresso in the mug, followed by a generous dollop of ethereal foam. Then Alexander picked up a large shaker. I knew what had to be inside. With 3 expert shakes, a pixie dusting of pumpkin spice kissed the foamy head of the latte. He picked up my mug and held it out. I walked up to the bar, carefully took the mug from Alexander's hand, and thanked him. I noticed, for the first time, he didn't have any legs and was strapped to a rolling stool. "I'm sorry about your accident, Alexander," I said with sincerity. He didn't say anything, but kept smiling. I saw a small cut in his neck and wondered if his accident had made it so he couldn't talk anymore. "Merry Christmas," I told him. He stared at Dad. I took a sip from the mug and, for the first time in nearly a month, it seemed like I could see in color again. The world felt right, and I was happy. My tears were drying as I took Dad's hand. We turned the corner and headed up the steps. We reached the landing, and Dad switched off the basement light. He always hated to waste electricity. "You can have one every morning now, Princess," Dad informed me. "As long as I'm around, I'll make sure you get whatever you need." I hugged him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. It was nearly as pleasant as the mug against my palm. He was right, too. Things have been wonderful ever since. It calls itself the Onyx, the Black, the Darkness. It is an ominous and otherworldly thing, slowly and painfully driving me to my grave since I was a child. I can remember our first encounter with clarity. The bulb in my nightlight had burnt out, and Daddy and Mommy were already in bed. No one was left to protect me. The creature walks hand in hand with the darkness of night, undetected, unexpected, yet perpetually feared. You see, this entity preys viciously on the weak of mind, the innocent, the unknowing. It is undetectable in the first moments of its arrival. No warning is given, no chance to prepare. It is simply there with you, whether you want it to be or not. It's followed me for years now. The 20th anniversary of when it first showed itself to me is approaching, and it knows I am near the point of surrender. The Onyx has mastered the art of enforcing psychological exhaustion upon its victims. Things go quite smoothly through it, when it has known you since your childhood, as it has me. Most people would recognize it upon seeing it. It has no real shape or mass. It's just that dim, wispy cloud of hellish darkness crawling up your bedroom wall and looming in silent weight of your surrender to weariness from the day. I am very much aware of the fact that it watches me, invisible during the day, blatantly surrounding in the night. The moment light is extinguished with the simple flick of a switch, it exists, dominant and evil. The Onyx has been gracious enough to inform me that tonight will be my final encounter with it. Not that it's going anywhere. Only me. I have no say in the matter, no control. I am under its merciless command. I am given no choice but to accept my fate and my final task, to lie in agonizing wait of the final visit of the Onyx. I'm starting to shiver. Oh God, I can already feel it. The sensation of several weights laid across my body is abrupt and powerful, pressing me into the mattress. I can't move. My muscles have stiffened to stone. I dare only to move my eyes, and I watch as the Onyx slithers under my closed door and into the room. It watches me from the foot of my bed. I am helpless, ensnared vulnerably with its insidious contemplation. It makes its way to the side of the bed, then arches its grotesque form over me, slithering what feels like a skeletal hand over my body. It towers over me, and its darkness overtakes me in its entirety one last time. Its delicate mantle of blackness glides across my face. I'm reminded briefly of a gothic and tattered bride's veil. The Onyx hovers to the darkest corner of the room, taking its usual route up the wall and onto the ceiling above my bed. It stares triumphantly down on me, and stays that way for some time, seeming to relish the moment. Finally, it begins its descent. I close my eyes. Several sharp objects, almost like claws, dig into the sides of my face, leaving behind what I'm sure are angry, bleeding gashes. I can't help it. I scream. The skeletal hands are closing over my skull. Then, suddenly, what feels like a third hand, decked with needle-like fingers, forces itself down my throat. I gag and shriek hoarsely as the spindly fingers dig through my insides, burning and tearing with every careless movement. Distinctively, I feel the hand move with purpose as it closes over my panicking heart. It has me. The fingers tighten. My vision turns black. A strangled cry beyond my own recognition escapes my obstructed throat. The claws gripping my head begin to tighten as well. Pressure builds inside my brain as the skull begins to crack. I experience every little split, every microscopic break. Warm liquids trickle down the sides of my face, into my eyes, into my open mouth. My body is made of agony. And then there is nothing. They find me like that a few days later, eyes glazed and mad with anguish, skull in shards with unknown fluids leaking out, blood seeping from the ragged lips and gathering in a large pool on my bruised, unmoving chest. Mysterious, ink-black handprints stain my skin in various places. My heart, they discover, is oddly missing. Gone. Nowhere to be found. What could have done this? The officers and investigators ask one another. The remnants of my eyes roll around rapidly in their sockets, looking frantically in all directions. It's right in front of you, I tell them. But their ears are deaf to my warnings. Their eyes are blind to the things of this netherworld of darkness and ceaseless torment. I watch the creature follow them out as they leave the gruesome scene of my demise. The creature. My second shadow. My lifelong stalker. My executioner. The onyx. It's all around you. It will never leave you. Take my word. Take the word of its claimed victim. You will see it. Just wait until dark. Though he wasn't real, Fargo was the best friend I ever had. Growing up poor meant moving wherever my dad could find work, and we never stayed anywhere long enough for me to make any real friends. It also meant that toys weren't a luxury we could afford, but I didn't mind. I loved Fargo more than any kid ever loved their new PlayStation or trampoline. He was a breadbasket-sized stuffed dog we bought from the flea market. He looked like a mutt and had soulful, chocolate brown eyes. The old lady we bought him from said that Fargo was a magical doll who could come to life. She also said that the moon landing was fake and that Ronald Reagan was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. I don't think my parents took her seriously. Her word was enough for my imagination, though, and soon Fargo had come to life, even if I had forgotten the stuff about the moon and Ronald Reagan. Every day, after school, Fargo and I would go treasure hunting around the neighborhood together. He would lead me to all sorts of amazing things. A stick that was a magic wand, a piece of glass that was a diamond, and a bird's nest that was a king's crown. It didn't matter to me that I didn't have money or friends. Fargo made sure that I was the happiest kid in the world. Until the day he got ripped. It had started off the same as any other day. Fargo had told me that there were mermaid scales down by the creek, and so we went looking for them. We'd just found a big one when I heard a low rumble coming from beside me. Fargo was growling. He was turned away from the creek, looking at something behind me. I turned around to see a man I didn't know. He wore a washed-out denim jacket, and he smelled like cigarettes. When I looked at him, I couldn't help but get a sinking, uneasy feeling in my stomach. He smiled. "Hey, kid," he said. "What are you doing?" "Collecting mermaid scales," I answered. "Oh, is that right?" the man asked, edging towards me. "Well, I've got a whole real-life mermaid back at my house, and she's just giving away her scales for free. Wanna see?" I backed up towards the creek. No thanks, sir. My mom says I'm not supposed to go off with strangers." I could hear Fargo growling again, but the man didn't seem to notice. "Come on, kid. You gonna pass up the chance to see a real-life mermaid?" the man said, and his grin widened to reveal gaps in his crooked yellow teeth. He was still edging closer to me, and I got the sudden urge to run. I glanced around and saw I was in an elbow in the creek. The only way out was forward. I picked Fargo up and held him out in front of me like a shield. He barked and snapped at the man, but the man didn't seem to notice. "Is that for me?" the man asked. He lunged at me. I pulled back, but it was too late. He had swiped Fargo from my hands. "Oh, he's a cute dog," the man said. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a little brown knife. He clicked a silver button on the side, and a blade popped out. He stuck the blade into Fargo's stomach, and Fargo let out a yelp that the man couldn't hear. He threw Fargo on the ground, and Fargo lay there, whimpering, staring at me with pleading eyes as his stuffing leaked out onto the ground. I took another step back and felt my foot sink into the mud. I had reached the embankment of the creek. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. My heart pounded in my ears. I had to run. The man lunged for me again. I felt his fingers close around my wrist. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to pretend I was somewhere else. I heard a scream, and I opened my eyes again to see the man stumbling backwards, swinging his arms around wildly. A stray dog was leaping at him, barking and snapping. The dog clamped his jaws around the man's knife arm, and the arm spurted blood. There was a loud rip, and the dog's jaws came unglued from the man's wrist, taking part of the denim jacket with him. He slashed the dog across the face, and the dog yelped and fell back. The man charged, but the dog crouched down low, sending the man tumbling headlong into the mud of the creek. The dog leapt at him, and the man scrambled up and bolted, little flecks of mud flying off behind him as he ran. I could hear the dog growling somewhere behind me as I watched the man disappear into the distance. The growling stopped, and I turned around to see the dog was gone. I walked over and picked Fargo up. He wasn't alive anymore. His little brown eyes stared at nothing, plastic and empty, and his stuffing spilled out the rips in his belly and face. It wasn't until I leaned closer and saw the little piece of washed-out denim sticking out of Fargo's mouth, and the flecks of blood that dotted his muzzle, that I remember the man hadn't slashed Fargo's face at all. He had slashed the stray's face. My arms prickled up with goosebumps, and I gently tugged at the scrap of denim. It slid out of Fargo's mouth, and the seam that had always closed up his snout sealed up behind it. Fargo never moved again after that day, and as the years went by and I grew up, I realized that the scrap of denim in Fargo's mouth must have just been my imagination. After all, the world isn't like a story toys don't really come to life because you want them to. Eventually, Fargo was relegated to a cardboard box at the top of the closet. That is, until last week. I woke up in the darkness to footsteps next to my bed. I froze with fear, not daring to breathe. Then I heard the low rumble of a dog's growl. Fargo's growl. A snarl, jaws snapping together. A man crying out, and then a thud, and footsteps retreating into the night. When I hit the lights, my eyes caught on the silver gleam of a knife at the foot of my bed. Next to it sat Fargo, his muzzle dotted with blood. The police would later tell me it was just a random home invasion, a drug addict looking for jewelry to steal. But right then, I was only thinking of Fargo. My heart pounded in my ears, and my skin knotted together in little bumps as I picked him up. I washed the blood off in the bathroom sink, and gently dried him off, placing him next to my pillow. I think that, from now on, that's where he's going to stay. Terror is coming home to find that everything you own has been replaced with an exact copy. Renowned horror novel writer Stephen King is quoted as saying, "Perceiving threats through natural intuition helped our ancestors to stay alive. Most of the time we can quickly guess if something is a threat to us, or not, such as a falling boulder or having a gun pointed at us. There is that space between what we think is a threat and what is not one. This is vagueness or ambiguity. A dictionary definition for ambiguity is the quality of being open to more than one interpretation. Inexactness. Our brains can't exactly guess if something is a threat by looking at it, like a creepy mask or a clown. There is nothing wrong with a mask or a clown. There's just something a little off about those two things. It's just unnatural. Let's say that you walk down the stairs to get yourself a glass of water in the middle of the night, after everyone else has gone to bed. It's so dark in your house that you need to have a hand against the wall just to get downstairs. You start to hear little noises that you normally would have ignored because you've heard them so many times. All of a sudden, you hear and feel breathing on the back of your neck when you thought you were alone, and turn around to see nothing there. Well, something happened to me that might never be explained. This experience wasn't some kind of lucid dream or a hallucination. It was real. I was in shock, and it took a little while for my mind to reason with itself and accept the alien situation that I was in. How else would I just wake up one night with a tattoo of the number 3 on my upper thigh in a place that I've never been to before? A week ago from tonight, I woke up to find myself strapped to a chair with a black blindfold over my whole face. I thought I was hearing voices that sounded exactly like my own. Next, some unknown force took off the blindfold, and I found myself in a dark room where I could barely see a single thing. A light then abruptly appeared and made a humming noise, and I saw that I was in a small room surrounded by 6 other people, all of whom looked exactly like me. We were all silent. We had no idea what we could say that would be relevant to what we were seeing. "Hello," a muffled voice said over an echoing speaker. "You are all probably in shock at this moment, and have nothing to say that would put any of you at ease. You may notice the similarities between yourselves." "Where the fuck are we?" we all said in unison, and then sharply went quiet because we were so shocked to have had the identical reaction. Jinx. "It's all right. Your reaction is completely normal. Who we are is unimportant. It's the question of who all of you are is what you should direct your attention towards. Are all of you you? Or are all of you individuals, just like someone you may make awkward eye contact with on the street?" The mysterious man was not making any of us feel better. After all, we'd all woken up strapped to chairs in a dark room and found 6 other people in the same situation that all looked and talked exactly like me. And I had nothing to worry about. That's madness. Like I said before, anything that I say by this point will not aid in calming any of you down, so it would be useless to even attempt to do so. There is just one explanation I will give you before we all leave. There are 7 of you joining us here today. All of you appear identical, down to that little freckle you have on the back of your left hand. I looked over to my left hand and saw that there was that little freckle right underneath my pointer finger. The truth is that almost all of you are copies. There is just one exception. By this point, I was, for some weird reason, actually starting to calm down. I must have been the real me. Isn't it obvious? You are all, by this point, assuming that you are the real you. Am I right? This is where you are wrong. How could I be wrong? I must be the actual Joel. I know that to be a fact. I have all of my memories, don't I? What were the rest of these people thinking? We took the original one of you and copied your consciousness into the 6 other bodies that we created. And then we strapped you all to one of these chairs. You will all be set free, and you will not be harmed by us ever again. But there is one catch. One of you will be able to go back and live your life the way it was before, and all of the others will need to start over. The ones of you who aren't so lucky to end up back in the place where they fell asleep will probably start planning to go to where you live now and replace yourself with a person who is living the life that you believe to be your own. We will make sure that you are not able to harm the one of you who gets to go back to the way things were. This can't be happening, I remember saying to myself. There was a 1 in 7 chance that things would go back to the way things were. What felt like only a few breaths and blinks ago. After the man stopped talking, everything faded to black, and I woke up in a bed that was not my own, across from a huge glass wall outlooking snowy mountains. My chest dropped into my stomach. I wasn't at my house. My girlfriend wasn't right next to me, and instead of a German Shepherd at the foot of my bed, there was a laptop that looked like my own with a piece of paper on top. This is what the paper said. Dear number 3, welcome to the Dolomites in Italy. This beautiful mountain range is elevated at 10,968 feet above sea level, and is where you have found yourself living. You will find a safe in the closet that will contain all of your financial papers, passports, a birth certificate, and other things of that nature. You do not need to worry about working. We have provided you with enough wealth to live comfortably for the remainder of your years, and there will not be a language barrier when communicating with the locals. You will not be able to do a reverse search of your face online, but you can follow the original Joel online and will be able to peer into his life. But it will not be possible for you to contact him in any way. Now, go out there and go on some adventures. Find a special friend and treat yourself every now and then. You are still young, and you have many more years in front of you. I felt so stuck. I haven't left my 3-bedroom house yet. Groceries were delivered yesterday, so I've been fine. I'm just sitting in front of this window looking at an old photo album. It has all the photos from my first birthday all the way up to my last few days of my old life. But there was one slide missing in the photo album. I guess it was symbolic of something. Then I went into Facebook to find Joel. And at the top of his wall he had 120 likes. Wow, I said to myself. I'd never gotten that many likes before. The photo was of Joel on one knee proposing to our girlfriend of 7 years. Maybe that was supposed to be the last picture in the photo album. But I will only be able to see how one of the 7 Joels lives the rest of their life through a Facebook and an Instagram page. I will never be at my wedding. I will never be able to meet my first child. I will never be able to sit down in a chair in the office of the job that I was working to have. All I can do is start over. Us humans live in a very strange world, which inspires so many questions that even the best of our thinkers don't have explanations for. We seek out answers, launching rockets into the depths of space, never to be seen again. We send boats into the deepest parts of the ocean in order to discover new places. But our brains are just too fragile to handle some horrifying truths. When I first moved into my apartment, the landlord told me a strange thing. Always check that the room is the right one before entering. Sage advice from a master of the obvious, you might say. Truth be told, I hadn't really been paying much attention up to that point. My landlord was the type of woman that put no effort in sounding happy to meet you. And whatever Eastern European accent she had certainly didn't make it any easier to understand. I probably should have asked a few more questions, but signing a lease wasn't a process I wanted to prolong any longer than I had to. Besides, it's not like I really needed an explanation. My early childhood diet didn't consist exclusively of paint chips after all. For how cheap the rent was, I wasn't about to worry over a bad joke. The place was one of those oddities of design that seemed to suck the fun out of everything anyway. Nothing but a series of copy and paste apartments stacked on top of each other for 13 laborious floors. Each one was practically identical, right down to the way the front door stuck when it rained. Not a single window among them. They even came furnished with a full set of drab appliances and furniture, devoid of any particular style or taste. It's like living in a filing cabinet, sterile and lacking a life of its own. You'd think we all lived in alphabetical order and referred to each other by apartment numbers. My accountant would love this place. As dull as the accommodations were, it didn't take more than a month for things to get interesting. There were little things at first, mostly just noises. Nothing particularly sinister, but they did a great job of keeping me up at night. One night I'd hear unintelligible whispers coming from my neighbor's bathroom that lasted for hours. The next, I swear I heard wolf-like howls from the floor above, despite a rigidly enforced no-pets policy. Once I even caught the unmistakable sound of crashing waves on sandy beaches from an apartment on the 6th floor. Occasionally, I would hear the noises coming from rooms in my own apartment. However, nothing would be out of place when I checked. Oh, I may have forgotten to mention that I live alone. It took a bit longer for anything really strange to happen, though. It was 4 months into my stay when the sound of clinking glass and slamming cabinets woke me up. It came from the kitchen, and I knew it had to be an intruder. I quietly slipped out of bed, grabbed the aluminum baseball bat I kept next to the door to remind me of how I really should get more exercise. I must have looked absolutely ridiculous tiptoeing down my carpeted hallway to the kitchen with how much noise the intruder was making. When I reached the doorway to my kitchen, I chanced to peek inside. Sure enough, I saw a dark figure furiously rooting through my kitchen cabinets. Tightening my grip on the baseball bat, I flipped on the light switch. Lucky thing I did, too. Otherwise I might have beaten an old, innocent woman to death. My midnight intruder started at the sight of me, her wrinkled face twisting into a mixture of fright and confusion. The unassuming dirty dressing gown and fluffy pink slippers she wore seemed an odd choice for a burglar. I recognized the woman. She was the old lady who lived 2 doors down from me. I'd even helped her with her groceries that very evening. After managing to calm the poor woman down, and assuring her that she was not in fact in her own flat, my elderly neighbor apologized profusely. She'd woken up in the night craving a cup of tea, she explained, and must have gotten lost in the dark, unlit building. How she managed to slip into my apartment without either of us noticing was beyond me. She must suffer from dementia, because she was absolutely convinced that she should still be in her own place. I don't think she understood just how close she had come to a baseball bat to the head, and I wasn't in the mood to explain it to her. I tried to be as polite and understanding as I could as I escorted her back to her apartment. But something was bothering me. Something about the whole affair made the little hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't until I locked my front door behind me that I realized what it was. Before going to bed, I remember quite clearly locking the door from the inside. I racked my brain all night, but I just couldn't explain how the old woman could have wandered into my apartment without opening my front door. Having no one else to ask, I decided to bring the subject up to my next-door neighbor the following day. Cornering him in the hallway that evening, I had trouble broaching the subject. When I'd finally stammered out my story, however, he seemed rather unsurprised by the whole ordeal. Apparently, this sort of thing happened all the time. Not just to the old lady down the hall, either. Almost everyone in the building had a similar tale. It was the doors, they said. They didn't always lead to the same place. Sometimes you could be facing a door that led to your bathroom, only for it to lead to your bedroom instead. He could even lead to a completely different apartment on a completely different floor. Once, he heard that someone's closet door had opened to the alley on the north side of the building. It was a pretty crazy thing to think that your door could lead anywhere in the building without notice, but my neighbor seemed to believe that the phenomenon stretched farther than that. To get around this little nuisance, he suggested I do what the other tenants do. The generally accepted method was to make 2 marks on either side of each doorway in the apartment with a marker. That way you could tell if the room you were about to enter was the right one at a glance. If the 2 marks didn't match up, you were staring at a doorway into the unknown. At least, that was the idea. The old lady must have forgotten to check when she stepped into my kitchen, or at least not seen it in the dark. My neighbor seemed rather annoyed by the thought. He made it painfully clear that I wait for the door to go back to normal before using it. I should, under no circumstances, ever enter a room that shouldn't be there. Always check first. My neighbor had experienced the anomaly himself in the past, but only as a mild annoyance. Even still, he was extremely adamant that I take the matter seriously. But how could I? Who in their right mind would believe a story as insane as this? Sure, it could explain how the old lady down the hall got into my apartment without using the front door, but it created all sorts of other questions. And the last thing I wanted to question were the laws of physics. Mass hysteria, it had to be. A building filled to bursting with lunatics. In the end, I found it simpler to write my neighbor off as a head case and move on with my life. However, I did as he suggested. With a red Sharpie secretly borrowed from work, I drew a line on each side of every door jamb in my apartment. It was more out of curiosity than anything else. Or maybe I was just daring the universe to prove me wrong. Either way, after a few weeks, I'd gotten into the habit of checking if both marks were there before I entered a room. I saw it as a little inside joke. When in Rome, do as the wackos do. Eventually, it became a silly little ritual I would do to remind myself the world wasn't crazy. Just the guy next door. I'd been living in my apartment for a little over a year before it happened to me again. I'd gotten up in the middle of the night to grumpily use the bathroom like I'd done many times before. I was on autopilot. On my way back to bed, I lifted my tired eyes to the doorway leading to the bedroom and grinned at the now familiar red. But I hesitated. There was only one mark, though only lit by a small lamp in the hallway. I was absolutely sure there was no red mark on the bedroom side of my door. I stood there for a while, blinking sleep from my eyes and trying to stare the second mark back into existence. The bedroom looked the same as I'd left it minutes before, save for the missing mark on the doorway. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? Maybe I was dreaming. Or was my kooky neighbor's story the real deal? As ridiculous as it sounded, I was sure of one thing. There had been 2 marks on my outward trip to the bathroom. I didn't go in right away. I wanted to, but a small part of me took what my neighbor had told me very seriously. First, I waved an empty hand in the doorway. Nothing particularly spooky happened. Emboldened by the knowledge that this phantom room wouldn't immediately melt my skin off, I took a tentative step inside. At first glance, nothing looked out of the ordinary. Everything was where I remember leaving it. Even my comforter was thrown aside like I'd just been sleeping under it minutes before. But then, why was the mark missing from my doorframe? I was certain there had to be something different about this room. In that moment, My neighbor didn't seem so crazy. And all I needed to prove it was to find what was wrong with this room. I tore open my closet and flipped my mattress in search of clues. Every drawer was emptied on the floor in my quest. I even tore the carpets up at the ends to look underneath. I looked everywhere in my madness, but found nothing. Everything was where it should be. Somehow, though, I knew this was not my bedroom, and it wasn't until I turned back to the door to check if the second mark was really missing that I realized what was different about it. This room had no door.